Hey everyone, so I wanted to make a quick educational video talking all about TP. So I'm going to talk about TP in the early game, the mid game, kind of different use cases for it, matchups and stuff like that. I'll timestamp all this in the description below if you want to go have a look. But I really wanted to make this video on TP because it's something that I see really misused, I think, in lower elo especially, and honestly even in high elo too. But pretty much always when I'm coaching people, we end up having to talk about TP. So I figured, it's kind of time to make a video on it. And I think it's especially bad if you don't know how to use TP because, well, one, it's really OP and it's very important for mid lane at a high level, but also because if you're using TP wrong or you're not really using it at all, it's very easy just to have a dead sum. And a lot of people will take it, right, just to copy the high elo players. But at some level, well, especially if you're not using TP properly, you might as well just have another combat sum, right? An Ignite or a Ghost or something, just because it's much, much simpler to use. So anyway, we'll kind of go through it. So we're going to start out with the early game and just kind of the general use cases for TP. So one of the big ones is just as a tempo cheat, right? So the nice thing about TP is that at any point you can basically base and TP back to lane without losing anything, right? Because even if they try and shove the wave, it's not going to be in time for you to TP back. So that means that TP is really, really useful for TPing back on specific spikes. So let's say you want to really get tier 2 boots, or you really want to get chapter, or you want to get, I don't know, dark seal tier. You can basically plan your base around a specific spike. And this is actually useful in the mid game as well. Like if you're waiting for, I don't know, Rabadon's gold, you might instantly base as soon as you have the Rabadon's gold and then TP back on the map, right? So that's one very important use for it, is just TPing back on the map as a tempo cheat around specific item spikes. Sometimes you might also want to TP on the map just for priors. So this maybe isn't the best example because I am TPing here in order to get the minions as well. But the reason like TPing here would be very important, even if the wave state were even, is because this is a level 7 Zed, right? Like this Zed can roam very easily, and I don't want to give Zed the chance to roam. So let's say the wave was just completely even, and Zed were just now walking into lane, and you weren't actually going to lose creeps under tower. I think you still TP, because you need to get back on the map in order to stop the Zed from roaming. This can also be very useful, like if a Herald is spawning soon, or a Dragon is spawning soon, or something like that. Basically, you can also, aside from the TPing for spikes and TPing to make sure you don't lose creeps, you can TP if the prio is going to be very important, or if you need to be on the map immediately. Another good way to think about TP in the early game is as a second health bar. So if you're ever in a bad matchup, you pretty much always want to take TP. And the reason for that is because you can afford to trade a lot of your HP away somewhat inefficiently in order to make sure you're still getting CS and you're still getting decent trades. And then when you get low, you can just TP back. And this is what makes it quite hard to just really, really dominate lane and mid, is because people have this second health bar, right? And so, especially if you're a melee champion, you really want to be using your health kind of as a resource, right? You don't just be wanting to give up a ton of creeps and make sure you stay high HP, because you actually want to TP back at some point. So obviously you don't want to take the damage for free, right? But be thinking about that. So in this like Ahri versus Victor matchup, if I didn't have TP at some point, I'm just going to be forced out and it's going to be really hard. But I know that I can afford to trade a lot of HP and then I can just TP back. It's also pretty broken, if you have something like refillable. Obviously corrupting pot is not so good anymore with the Doran's changes, but if you have refillable, that also adds to your second health bar. If you have more mana, that adds to your efficiency as well. And then you can always just TP back to lane in order not to lose anything. So now we're going to talk about TP versus TP matchups. So these are matchups where you're both taking TP. TP usage in these sorts of matchups is kind of simple. For the most part, you're just going to want to base and TP after your opponent. So the reason for that is so that you base with more gold, and that way you go home, you spend all your money, and you come back with a combat advantage. Now, you won't always be able to do this. Again, if you're in a losing matchup, it's going to be hard. But the way you can do this is by taking better trades, by out-sustaining your opponent. Maybe you force their TP out with a gank or something like that. Essentially, however you manage it, if you can, you want to TP back after your opponent. Because like you see here, right, Syndra got pretty low, and Akali has a lot of sustain, so she couldn't chunk me out. So she based and TP'd, and she bought an Amp Tome, which means that I know at some point here, I can base TP, and she won't be able to push the lane in time to stop me, and then I'm going to be able to have a much more significant advantage. So while I could match the base right here, right, I could base right now, spend my 900 gold, maybe I'll buy like, I don't know, Darksteel Lamptone refillable or something. I know I can stay a bit longer because she can't crash this wave, and I can just base on an even bigger spike. So here what I do is I go for 1100 gold, I look for the base TP back in the lane, and I would have gone Merc Treads if she wasn't getting destroyed so hard, but instead I went for just damage, and now I come back basically, and because I have this item advantage, it's really hard for her to do anything, right? Like she can't really trade into me Amp Tome into Blasting Wand, so now I can just like freeze this wave or do whatever I want. So if you do get the opportunity to TP to lane after your opponent and spend more gold, that'll generally mean that you can win the lane harder. If you're forced to base first in a TP versus TP matchup, it's not the end of the world. Like, obviously you are going to be down a little bit of gold, but you still get some advantages. And those advantages are normally that you get priority on that first wave back in lane, and you can use that priority in order to get a ward or something. So you can see here, trades aren't going too favorably versus Syndra, and the wave's pretty far up, and there's also a Hecarim near me, so I know that I need to recall, right? And this is a bit unfortunate. So what you would do normally here is you would TP back, and then you can immediately look to set a vision. Now, she actually matched base, but what would normally happen is that, like, you can come and shove this wave, and then either, you know, you can go ward, or you can roam if you're a roaming champ. Alternatively, if they do match base with you, this is fine, because then they didn't stay that extra wave to get the extra gold. So there's basically like a pro and con here for them. They can either stay and have that bigger gold advantage over you, or they can match in order to not give you priority. So ultimately, like, again, it's kind of better if you can TP after them, I think, anyway. But there are some matchups, especially versus assassins, where you'll want to TP back at the same time just to really make sure they don't have a window to roam. So yeah, that's pretty important as well. The next tip is pretty advanced and something that you don't really see in TP versus TP matchups. And actually, it's more common in TP versus no TP, which we'll talk about next. But I want to talk about it here as well. So as I said before, right, like generally, if you can base after your opponent and have more gold, that's better. But sometimes, if you're both low and they don't have enough mana to actually crash the wave, you can look to base into a freeze. So you want to be careful how you do this. So what you got to do is you got to pay attention to the next wave coming on the map, right? So you can see this wave is just passing my tier 3. If I base right now, especially if Azir saw me base, he would just shove the wave and reset, and then that would suck for me, right? But what I can do is I can actually try and stay here until it's kind of at the point where he will no longer be able to crash this wave before the next wave comes. So even if Briar weren't here, by going to basically ward this bush, he's never going to be able to crash this wave in time before the next one comes. And the reason that's problematic is because I TP back with an item advantage, obviously, because he hasn't reset, and a huge, you know, HP advantage as well. So at this point, what you can do is, if you're not scared of getting ganked or whatever, you can just like walk up and fight them, because there's not really any way they can trade back, right? If they try and trade back, they'll die. So you can use this in order to deny essentially more gold than you would lose otherwise. So they're still going to base with more gold than you, but you're going to base on the next base with more gold than them because you've just denied them. And also, there's nothing stopping you from keeping this wave frozen, right? Like, he has to TP, but he has to TP back to a frozen wave. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull this, and then I'm going to let the wave stay on my side, and I'm not going to thin it out. And that will force him to TP this wave, and it's also going to make him lose a pretty significant part, or perhaps all of this wave as well. So again, to kind of reiterate, because it is pretty advanced, the window you're looking for is where you're both too low to shove, like you both want to reset, and the next wave is coming, especially if it's a cannon wave. Wait till it's close enough to mid. If I actually just go back here, so pay attention to this wave. When it's close enough to mid, that's when you can start your reset. So normally when it's past the tier 2 tower, obviously it depends on how many creeps are alive, but yeah, that can be really useful. And I'll talk about this again in a moment because it's very important in TP versus no TP. So yeah, hopefully that kind of made sense. If it didn't, just comment below because it is sort of advanced. So when you're playing TP versus no TP, or if for some reason your opponent wasted TP very early in the game, one thing you can do is just base really early and then lock them in lane. So this is kind of similar to a cheater recall, the way top laners do it. Essentially, it's going to give you this item advantage that you can leverage. So here I got ganked and basically lost all my health, but so did Akali as well. So the problem that she has is if she resets, she's going to lose a big wave, right? So she wants to stay. So I TP back, but now I have a pretty sizable advantage, and I can just lock her in lane. And so the problem she has here is basically like, if she bases at any point, this is an Akali with Ignite, if she bases at any point, I will always be able to make her lose a wave because I can shove the next one. Now, she can stay under tower, but this will cause her to bleed some CS on every wave, right? Like, she just can't get all of them. And it also means that she has no priority over mid, so if we ever want to invade their jungle, there's nothing really she can do about it, right? So you can see here, even though she's kind of staying under tower and she's actually not dying, she is bleeding CS. And so, like, yes, if she doesn't die, it's okay, but at some point you lose more than if you had just recalled. So this is really the trouble of playing Ignite versus TP, is that your opponent is always going to get the better first base, and then they can lock you in lane, and unless you get help from your support or jungle, there's pretty much no way for you to get out of it. You can also just play a war of attrition. So here I'm against an Ignite Zoe and I'm playing Orianna and I've managed to keep my TP and I've got Chapter. So I come back to lane basically, and because I know I have TP, I can afford to use as much mana and as much HP as I want. As long as I don't die to her, like as long as I don't get all in by the champ with Ignite, I will always be ahead. I can just use my resources as freely as I like. So basically I'm just spam shoving waves. I'm not worrying about mana efficiency at all, because if I get low, I'll just TP back. And I know that if she wants to kind of match the efficiency, she's going to have to use a lot of mana, right, to match the wave clear. And it's not as efficient for her because she is going to just have to TP back. So I'm just playing under a tower, basically like doing as much as I can. You know, she's getting lower and lower. Even though my mana is getting lower, it doesn't matter, right? Because I can always TP. So eventually, she gets chunked out and she's forced to reset. And then I stay a little bit as well. So something you might do if you don't have TP is just instantly base here to make sure you get back on the map in time. It's probably fine in this case anyway, but anyway, because I have more time, because I have that TP, I'm able to walk up, I get the plate, and then I just TP back on the map. So here I was a bit worried again about Zoe roaming, so I TP immediately, even though I wouldn't lose the wave, and it just allows me to keep the pressure up. So as I was talking about in the previous TP versus TP section, there are opportunities, especially versus champs with no TP, where you can base and teleport back to the lane and just have a frozen wave. So basically what's happened here is I died very early to a gank, but my Akali's actually used her TP. So obviously if your opponent has Ignite, this makes it a lot easier. But in this case, I know she doesn't have TP because she's already reset. You can see she's got the Doran's shield and the boots. So what I can do essentially is just push the wave, and then at some point she is going to have the wave bounce back out and I can just freeze it. So what I'm doing is I'm shoving. I know I'm in a base with a big item advantage, and then so here this wave will start to shove back out, right? And because she doesn't have TP, she can't really base. Like if she bases right now, this wave will just slow push into my tower and deny her a bunch of creeps. So she really wants to stay, but the problem is I can always TP back. So in this situation specifically, I didn't need to TP back because Udyr actually froze my wave for me. Like he was denying Akali the whole time. But what you would normally do is you TP back here and then you just zone Akali off the wave. Like there's no way for her to crash it, because she's so down in health and she's so down in items. So her only choice here basically is she can kind of like stick around and again like bleed CS. You can keep it frozen and just make sure that she can never crash it. Maybe eventually she does, but she's going to bleed so much CS on the way in, and then you can always shove another wave before she resets. So again, much more replicable against the champs with no TP or ones that have wasted it. Essentially, you're just looking for that opportunity where you can crash the wave into their tower. It's going to be bouncing back to you. You instantly base TP back to the lane, having a health and item advantage, and then you just make sure that they can't crash it. And the last thing to quickly talk about for the TP in the early game is what to do when it becomes unleashed teleports. So the obvious thing to do is if you see an opportunity to TP behind bot lane, just go for it. It's normally pretty hard to TP to top lane because the champs are a lot tankier, and honestly just killing them means a lot less. But if you can get a ward behind your opponents and you have your cooldowns up, you know, you have CC, you can look to TP behind. Some champs, you know, maybe don't have the ability to do this, but pretty much everyone, you know, if you see a Caitlyn, say, that's pushed up like this, you will just be able to TP behind them. So obviously you don't always want to just save your TP for this. Like if you see an opportunity to use it in lane, you probably should. At the same time, if you happen to have TP, and especially if you're one of those champs that can gank other lanes, you know, like a Lysandra or a Galio, or pretty much anything that has CC, you should definitely look for it. And if there's one thing I want you to kind of take away from the early game, it's that remember that the TP is not a combat sum. Like if you don't get value out of it, whether that's in the lane or by roaming to other lanes or even just making sure you're not falling behind in CS, it is going to be useless, right? Like you have to create some value out of it yourself. And that value might just be that you're keeping up in golden XP, right? Like it might be that you're in a losing lane and you can't really do anything more from it. But the point is, don't just take TP and not think about it. Now let's talk about TP in the mid game. So something I talked about in my Challenger 75% win rate guide was kind of mid-game being a 5-minute cycle. Basically, Dragon has a 5-minute respawn, and the 4 minutes before that 1 minute before Dragon is spent essentially gathering as much gold as you can, and then that 1 minute before Dragon spawns is going to be essentially like grouping with your team, setting up for Dragon, just controlling the vision, all that sort of stuff. So the best way to think about TP is that TP gives you permission to side lane. Basically, if you have TP, you should pretty much never be grouped, and you should push the side lane as far as possible. If you don't have TP, then you kind of have to push a little bit shallow shallower, it doesn't mean that you should always be grouped, right? Because you still want to be able to find CS, but it means you can't really push as far as you'd like. So essentially, if I had TP here, I would keep going. I would just try and pressure the top tower, I'd ward for myself, and then I'd probably be fine. But because I don't, and because my team is starting to look for action on the other side of the map, I'm going to start rotating down. Now, this doesn't mean that I'll get to the fight in time. I'm still trying to find CS, right? But it means that I'm closer to them, I'm closer to the next objective and stuff like that. So we skipped ahead to where I do have TP, and now I feel very confident just pushing the side lane as much as I want. So initially I'm moving a river a bit, just in case I was getting ganked or something. But despite my jungle and top making a play on the other side of the map, I'm content to stay top. And that's because I know even if there is a fight bot side, that I'll always be able to TP into it. So this is kind of what I mean about TP giving you that permission to side lane. You can stay in this side lane as long as you want, pretty much, as long as you have TP, because no matter what happens, no matter what fight these guys, happen to get into, you will always be able to get there. So this is a good example here of when you need to group with TP. So dragon spawning in a minute 20, and this is a very important dragon. It's the third dragon. So basically we need to be able to contest it. Otherwise, they're probably going to get soul later on. And it's going to be really, really difficult. So if you have TP and you need to contest dragon, you have two choices. Basically, somehow you want to get control over dragon, right? And so the two ways you can do that is either you base, you group with your team, and then you get dragon together. That's basically like the normal way to do it. The other way is to keep going top, force someone to respond to you, and then you can TP to dragon. Now, why can't I do that here? Because I have 1200 gold, so that's 4 kills, and also have very low mana. So if I stay on the map here, there's no way I'll get the opportunity to base and get to this dragon in time. And I also don't have enough mana and stuff to really pressure this tower, right? Like I can't come and take all these camps and take the tower because I just don't have enough kind of resources to do it. So instead, even though I have TP, I'm going to come reset and then group up with my team. So basically I come, I group up and we just come and secure the dragon control. We end up making a pick and then we're able to end up getting this third dragon. Now here's going to be another exception. So this time I don't have TP and dragon is up. So you'd think that I would just walk to it. But I know that we lose this dragon fight at the moment. So basically their Samira is super spiked and we cannot possibly win a fight. So if you know you can't win the dragon fight, then you're better off trading on the other side of the map. So you can see that I'm just kind of pushing out top. And my goal basically is to get the top tower. I'm not worried about not having TP because we shouldn't fight this dragon. Now, if you think your team is going to fight this dragon anyway, then you could maybe go to it, but I honestly think it's just a losing fight no matter what. So you're probably better off like prioritizing yourself, playing selfishly, and just coming to get the top tower. TP can also be used just to get on the map immediately if you want to like make a player, if you really want to take a tower or something. So in this situation, we've picked the Akali and we have a lot of Baron DPS. So my team started pinging towards Baron, so I just immediately TP'd on the map because if I were to walk bot here, it would take me so long to get set up in this bot lane that by the time I got there, right, like any play on the top side would already be over and I just immediately have to TP. So I might as well just TP on the map early and that way I can shove this wave and then I can come to Baron essentially if my team needs it. So this is just one of many examples of how you can do this, but an example could be like if you guys got Baron and you really needed to get back on the map quickly, your team's ready to pressure, you can just base TP on the map, right? Essentially, you're trying to find opportunities to use TP. It's much better to, use TP when you see a good situation for it rather than hold it forever and just not end up using it. I think that's very bad. So here's another example of that here. I'm just quickly TPing on the map. You can see we got Baron. So I just TP on the map immediately, right? And because I know I can get behind this allow and just kill her. So while it might be nice to hold this TP and that would make side laning and stuff a bit easier, if I know I can get guaranteed value with the TP, I just use it nice and early, right? Like I know that if we can pick this allow, it's going to make sieging without Baron a lot easier because she won't be able to pressure the other side of the map. And also it's just good for tempo. Like I'll be on the map quickly. And here's another example of that. So I'm pushing top lane, but I noticed that Kennen is TPing into the fight. So basically what I was thinking here is I probably want to shove this and then be able to TP flank because there's going to be a fight on the bot side, right? Like if Kennen's TPing in, there's probably a fight. So we spot Kennen and then I immediately just look for the TP here, right? So this gets me on the map nice and early. It does mean that I won't be able to pressure the side lane as much, but we've got Baron, right? And the game is, probably going to be over soon anyway. So I don't really need to hold my TP. So we just come in and get those kills. So my TLDR for the mid game is basically 3 guidelines. The first one is that if you have TP, generally you just want to be away from your team, right? You can find farm and you can find stuff on the other side of the map, unless of course Dragon is in 1 minute, then you probably just want to base and be grouped. If you don't have TP, then you still want to try to find opportunities to farm as much as possible, right? You're still trying to find those opportunities to get gold whenever you can, but you also need to look to group it sometimes, or at least move down the map, like try find ways to be close to your team, but still getting gold. And the last thing is, if you see a good opportunity to use TP, whether that's to get gold or to flank or just to get on the map quicker or to get a spike, generally just use it. Obviously there's like optimization with like your TPs, right? There will be a better TP probably, but at the same time, you really don't want to just end up with a dead combat sum and just be sitting on your TP the whole game. So don't be afraid just to kind of pull the trigger if you see what looks like a good TP situation, and maybe you'll feel the fallout of that, right? Like maybe you'll feel like, oh, now I can't side lane because I don't have TP for a while, but then you can learn from that. And I think that's much better than just holding your TP and just not using it. So guys, that's going to be it for this video, and hopefully you learned a lot. I think a few little guidelines in the way you use TP do go a pretty long way. Again, I think it's important to note that there aren't that many just awful ways to use TP. Mainly just the bad thing about using TP is not using it at all, right? Like that's generally what happens. People just end up grouping in the mid game and not really doing anything with it. So yeah, hopefully this kind of points you in the right direction. I do think some of it is like you kind of need to learn what a good TP looks like, right? And now that you have some kind of framework to use, it should just make it a lot easier. But yeah, if you do have questions about the TP usage or, you know, other things you can do with it or things that you felt like weren't made clear in this video, please just put it in the comment section below. Otherwise, you can come to my stream, twitch.tv/ShokLol. I've been streaming a lot more lately, so if you want to just come ask directly there, that is fine as well. Otherwise, guys, hopefully you did enjoy the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.